Blog Talk Radio.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Meeting of the Minds. It's me, Robert, and I'm here with Mike tonight. And we got an interesting topic, I would say, to talk about. We're talking about interracial relationships tonight. I think it's an interesting topic when Michael brought it up because it's not really talked about a lot more, or a lot anymore. And I think it's still relevant. And I think that even though, everything's pretty progressive at this point, I still think it's still a issue that needs to be discussed because I think everyone at some time or another has dealt with this one way or another. So we're going to break this down and see where it goes. Me and Michael just decided we're just going to hang out tonight and let you guys pretty much just eavesdrop on our conversation because we're talking about stuff like this, just to see what's there. But I know Mike was pretty much the one who originally brought this up. So, Mike, how did you come to this? Like, what were you thinking about when you wanted to talk about this?
Well, basically, I just had a lot of experiences with it, and, a lot of my people that I know have a lot of experiences with it. And I just think it's something that I think in today's world it's become a little bit more accepted. I would say a lot more accepted, even in the last, 5 years. But I still think it's something that when you're in an interracial relationship, it's just there's certain things that go along with it that I think bring a little bit more maybe complications to a relationship that I would say that people of the same race don't necessarily have to deal with. And, I just wanted it's just something that seemed like a good thing to talk about, a good topic. I know the biggest thing for me is just that, because I've been in, I'm white. I'm born in white suburbia. And I've dated, I've dated black girls. I've dated Mexican girls. I've dated Asian girls. I've dated even white girls. But there's a much different dynamic that happens when you date someone outside of your race, and I think that dynamic plays a huge role in that actual relationship and how that relationship comes together. I think being in an interrelational relationship, you have a lot more problems that are at the forefront that come from the outside, not necessarily within the two people, but just your families, just how you get looked at when you go to Burger King or when you go out to the movies or when you go out to dinner. There's just something about that seems to a different atmosphere that seems to happen when it comes to that. So I just think it's something that's it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, most definitely, because my first thought about it, when you brought it up, was coming from the standpoint of we're the first generation, the millennial generation, to really kind of be past civil rights issues, past segregation issues, and all of that old time type of thing. I know it's no different in different parts of the country, though. You go to the South, you're still going to have certain things you're going to deal with more than others, maybe, but nevertheless, I still think it's relevant because, we're in that weird transition period where our parents are still were from that certain era, and they still, they remember dealing with certain type of things, and they still remember how it used to be and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's important because, one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard, or I don't even think it was a quote, I think the lady just was talking about it, but she said that, excuse me, you can't really know who you are just being around people who are like you. Right. And I think that was, it's pretty crucial because, when it comes to interracial relationships in general, not just romantic, it goes back into that thing of who are you trying to be? You know, what really are your goals in life? Because I know a lot of people get caught up in their idea of what life is supposed to be like, and they can really get thrown off because no matter how, not racist you think you are, I don't think anybody grows up thinking about, their one or whatever, that perfect relationship with somebody of a different race.
Absolutely.
And, I don't think it's conscious or anything, but if you think about it, when you're thinking about your girl, especially girls thinking about the kind of guy that they're going to marry, I don't know how many actually think of a guy who's of a different race. And so, to me, this is important moving forward because, like you said, there are certain things that come along even now with dealing with somebody of a different race in a romantic relationship. I've had plenty, like Mike said, we've had them all, and not just about crafts, but, I've dealt with girls of every race, and there is certain things that are different about being with somebody of a different race. There are certain issues that you have to deal with that you don't have to deal with necessarily with somebody of your same race. And so my first question to you is, what exactly have you experienced in your dating life, in your, romantic relationships that you saw that even now it still stood out to you?
Well, I would say when it comes to that, I think the biggest, there's two things. I think one is just when you're out in public, and even if it's as simple as you're going to get something to eat really quick, or you're going to the mall, you need to go run errands, and you and that person of another race are with you, and you tend to get certain looks, and certain people just look at you a little bit differently. And I would say it would be more people of the older generation. I think the newer generation, the millennials, I think they're a little bit more past that, but they're still a little bit. But people of the older generation, like, for example, when I used to date a girl who was black, and when we would go out and we would just go to the gas station or go grab something to eat, do something simple, the older generation, whether it be white, black, Mexican, Asian, whatever the race was, we would get a different look. And then you would almost, like, it's almost like your senses are a little bit heightened because you can almost feel that they're saying something about you. They're specifically about, that white guy with the black girl. And they kind of bring out certain stigmas that probably aren't necessarily true, but those are the stigmas that come out regardless of who you really are. And those people don't even know you. They've never met you. But it almost brings like a certain sort of pressure. And it's something that is, I would say at first, for me personally, was very hard to deal with just because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to being looked at and talked about like almost to your face, but in a like behind your back sort of manner. And it's something that it's almost unexplainable unless you've been in that situation.
Right.
It's very, very hard to deal with initially. Now, once you go and you kind of get in the groove, you kind of understand that's how it is, and you get a little bit used to it. But, I mean, do you think it brings a much added pressure to the relationship?
I definitely do. Especially when most likely neither of you, your normal probably isn't dating somebody outside your race, first and foremost. Right. So, you probably something you never even thought about. Right. There's the thing about this, most people, this is probably not on the forefront of people's minds on a daily basis in terms of that arena, but like I do believe people are aware of it at the same time. But I definitely think it brings added pressure because I know for me, being a black guy and like if I'm dating like a white girl, I get a lot of pressure from my own race more than anybody else, so that's interesting to really, to be, like you said, to kind of experience, because you realize that not only do you have to deal with the normal relationship issues or normal, all that kind of stuff, but when you realize there's, when you go out now, you kind of have to be aware of certain things. And you would never think about that in any other situation. And to me, that's like, that's pressure, regardless, whether you want it to be or not. It's pressure. It's bringing it's adding something to, your situation that, wasn't there before. And I do think that people are kind of less inclined to look for something outside of their race, and not necessarily have anything to do with racism, period. But there's clearly still some social stigma about it, because it's still, even though it's still, or even though now it's more not that big of a deal, quote unquote, when you have situations like racial situations coming up in the news, or just in society in general, it just kind of reinforces certain things that you were, subconsciously exposed to, or even, and all that kind of stuff. And so I definitely think it adds more pressure. Do you think that it's different if, like, you have a black guy and a white girl, or a white girl and a black woman, or, because to me, I think it does. To me, I think it is even different. You want to even break it down into, what kind of race is hooking up with what kind of race, and whether it's a male or female. Because I think that, being, obviously being around you and knowing your situation, I think you had to deal with certain things by being a white guy and dealing with a black girl, as opposed to me being a black guy dealing with a white girl, or, whatever the race is. So, like, what do you think about that? Do you think it's different in that kind of a context?
I do think it's different, because I think it's almost, you're being stereotyped. So when I was dating a black girl, I was stereotyped as the white guy who listened to rap, who was trying to be black. I was stereotyped into that category, even though I did like some of those things, but that was not who I was. So you almost get people put you into a category, and they almost act or react based on you being in that category. So then when you don't act like that, I think people, they don't know how to respond to that, because people were expecting me to act a certain stereotypical way. And when I didn't act like that when I was with her, then I think it almost brought out more negative connotation. Basis, like, when I was, so you listen to rap, so you must do this, you must like go to the club, you must like to do this. And it's like, well, I like to do some of those things, but that's not who I am. So it's almost, you don't even get a chance to show other people who you are when you're with them, because they immediately put you into that stereotype. And it's very hard to break out of that stereotype once people have put you into that stereotype. It's almost impossible, I would say, because people don't want to get to know you anymore, because they think they already know who you are and what you're about. And, I can remember bringing her around the family. And the first time I brought her around my family, I didn't say whether she was black, white. I just said, my girlfriend's going to come over, and then we went out to dinner. And you can almost tell around my family, like, everyone was looking at me, and I was basically put in a very awkward position, because it was like, whoa, well, why didn't you tell me this? It's like, well, to me it didn't matter what race she was, but they just expected certain things. And once they saw that she was black, they almost acted differently towards me. And so I it's one of those things to where from that point on, I always told them if I was dating someone of the opposite race, a Mexican or a black or an Asian, I almost had to tell them, almost to prepare them so that they wouldn't be shocked when that person come. And it's kind of it's kind of unfortunate, but I think that we still have that underlying issue of race. And if you don't look like somebody, you're going to bring those stigmatisms in. And I think that it's starting to get better as each generation comes, but I still think it's there, and it's definitely something that when I brought around my family, I definitely noticed very much so. And I'm sure you felt similar situations.
Right. You know, and it's kind of crazy because to me it was almost kind of reversed because, like, for me, you know, I have, you know, white family members already. I have, you know, white aunts that I've known they've been my aunt all my life. So, like, in my family, it's always been my normal. And so, you know, when it comes to my family and bringing it around my family, it's never been an issue. It's never been, you know, it's just normal. It doesn't seem to be anything. But I always think about it in terms of, well, what about when I go to her family? You know, or what happens when I go, you know, and I've always, like, kind of avoided, especially if I'm dealing with a woman who is a different race, I kind of avoid going down that road with them because I don't want to be put in a situation like that, you know, and sometimes it's hard for the girl to understand that because, you know, obviously she don't think she's racist because she's dealing with you or anything like that, and she doesn't think her family's like that at all. But I know that it's always different once it becomes real, you know, and it's always different when it's in your face and it's in your house, and because like you said, it brings out. It's not so much that this particular race; it's what that means, you know, and we all want to believe that we're past that, but we are being fed certain things every day about certain races, you know, regardless of what, you know, if you're going to watch the news, you're going to see black people a certain way majority of the time you're watching it, you know, or white people or whatever, you know, and so it makes it tough because, you know, you can be naive about it to a certain degree that kind of makes me uncomfortable because, like I said, like most time, you know, girls are just kind of like, oh, yeah, whatever, you know, but I know that, you know, that
not the case.
Not be that may not be the case when it really comes down to it. You know, everyone is cool because you've never really done it before. You never really brought it around. But like you said, you feel the tension sometimes when you're in certain environments. And you know certain things are there, and you know that, you know, that something's going on, that there's an uncomfortableness about it because of what you represent initially without, you know, like I say that without even hearing you talk or getting to know you or anything like that. And so what I want to know is, do you think that, or how much of an effect do you think this has on people actually getting together? And do you think it really does affect people getting together?
That's a good one. I don't think it affects people getting together. I think that depending on how you were raised, obviously, but I think for most people, I don't think that affects, because most people I know have dated someone outside of their race. So I don't think it affects the actual getting together, but I think when the actual effect comes is when those people go out together, when they're with let's say they're not with their friends and they're out together by themselves, or to go take a vacation, they go bring home people to family members. I think that's when the actual effect comes. But I truly don't think that if you just see someone that you find attractive, I don't think it affects how you go about pursuing that relationship. And I almost think it should, because you got to understand that when you pursue someone from another race, you gotta know, like, there's gonna be certain things that you're gonna have to deal with that
that majority of relationships who are, if you're white and white, black and black, Asian and Asian, whatever, if you have the same race, you're not going to have to deal with. So not only are you going to have that added pressure of being in a relationship and dealing with all those relationship issues, now you're going to have to deal with those relationship issues when it comes to people not of the same race. And I almost, we're getting to the point to where it's acceptable. You see it a little bit more and a little bit more. But I know even myself, like when I'm out and about and I see two people not of the same race together, I do take an extra second and look. I mean, and that's just subconsciously. It's just like, oh, okay. Right. And it's something that I think that is naturally still in us, and I think it's slowly starting to become the normal. But until it becomes the normal, I think you're always going to have that thing inside of you that looks at you like, oh, those two people don't look like each other. Well, why did they get together? And right. I think, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think it's just one of those things that I really would like to get to a point, and obviously in society, that it is acceptable and there's not that stigma, there's not that negative connotation to it. But do you think that'll ever happen, or do you think it's just always going to be something that people are going to look at and take a second to pause and think?
I do believe that there will come a time when it will be the norm. I don't know how long that will actually be. But the one thing I can say about our generation is that relationship is extremely important to us. Right. They call us the fatherless generation, and one of the things that come out of that, not having that father, influence, is that you really cling to relationship because you didn't have it. You didn't have that presence there. Even if your father was in the house, how much did he actually talk to you? How much did you actually deal with him? And what our generation seems to have done is really cling to relationships. But what our generation also has done is has really brought back out the power of image, because we're the social networking generation, because a lot of our lives are online now, that how our situations look has become pretty important once again. I don't know if it's ever been less important to say that, but I think it's just been brought to a different level as a result of social networking. And that's where I believe you're going to have, where you're having the biggest roadblock, I think, if nothing else, is can I put this person on Facebook for my 3,000 followers?
Right.
Can I? Am I going to be taking a bunch of Instagram? Because like you said, I think it's more accessible now. It's not as much of a big deal, but at the same time, I'm still not seeing a bunch of people with people of different races.
Right.
Or you're not seeing it on Facebook, and you're not seeing it on Instagram. You're not seeing it it's not something you see every day still. I know divorce is rampant because everyone knows someone who's been divorced, multiple people. So I don't know. Like I said, the 50% thing, I'm not sure yet, but that's another discussion. But at the end of the day, to me, for something to become, I know it's become just a significant part of the fabric of society, is that you got to see it pretty much every day. Or know somebody, or it be, you're exposed to it on a pretty consistent basis. And I don't think, I know we're not there yet.
Right.
I know that they had that crazy statistic that said that 90% of white people don't have one minority friend. I thought that was a pretty ridiculous, some ridiculous, percentage. And I was just like, I don't know about, I think on some level it's true, but not just for white people, for everybody. I remember when we were at State, all the agents hung out with Asian people.
True.
True. Majority of the white people were walking around with white people. Majority of the black people were still hanging around with black people. So it wasn't like no one was talking to each other, but when it came down to it, people were still in their own tribes.
Right.
So, when it comes to relationship, I do think there's still deterrents that are very much strong that prevent people from even going down that route, because like you said, if there still weren't things that people were afraid of about it, then I think it would be more, you would see it a lot more. And like you said, when you see it out and about, when you're just, at the mall or just going to dinner or something, and you see somebody of a different race with each other, you do notice it.
Right.
You really do notice it. You might look for a second longer. You just may glance a little longer. But you do recognize it. Maybe not something you're thinking about all night or anything, but you recognize it. You recognize it because there's something still that's saying, there's something still unfamiliar about that.
Right.
So,
Okay. So do you, because I can remember a time when I brought my girlfriend over, and it was the same one that wasn't black. And I brought her to my grandparents' house. And then she left, and I saw my grandparents later. And, my grandparents were born at a different time.
Right.
All of our grandparents were born at a different time. And I remember they said some things to me, and I was just looking at them like, why would you say that? How could you say that? But I had to realize that they were born at a different time, and a different mindset, and a different era. And they couldn't understand. Just like I couldn't understand where they were coming from, they couldn't understand where I was coming from. It's almost like there's a disconnect when it comes to this generation and the older generations. There's a disconnect that's saying what is okay and what is not okay. And do you think that as we get older and as this generation gets older, that it becomes okay? Or do you think there's always going to be that thing that says, well, you don't look like me, therefore that's not okay?
I think that as we, like you said, we start to move past this prior generation, because like I said, that's really the last generation that really lived, in that, that particular time. So I think because it's we're the first to really be, to have been born in, the diversity of, and the acceptance, and there's been no rules of anybody can't do anything anymore. So we, we're fresh into this, this time in history, that you will start to see it become more, I would say normal, but just more consistent, because I do believe at the end of the day, people want to find their one. People want to
absolutely.
People want the real thing. I think at the end of the day, that real thing is going to be more important than anything else, because like we've always talked about, as society has gotten more globalized, as we've been more connected, it's almost made people feel more alone at the same time. And that's really kind of an interesting dynamic when you think about it, kind of how that happens. But there's still, like I said, there's still things. I remember, talking to you and Chase when we were in San Diego, and I remember talking to you guys about a girl I was interested in who was white. And I remember, like, definitively coming home and saying these exact words. Like, can you really imagine me and this girl walking down the mall together, though?
I remember that.
And I remember, like that being a real issue for me, you know, at the time. And like it's kind of, you know, I don't know how that sounds, but it's just the truth nonetheless.
Right.
You know, that's what I was thinking, you know, 'cause I had to think about that because not so much that I'm worried about, you know, what's, you know, my image or what it like looked like for me. It wasn't even about that. I was more worried about her. You know,
Absolutely.
like, because you don't want anything stupid to happen or anything to happen while you're in public, you know, especially with your girl, that makes her feel unsafe, makes her feel uncomfortable, you know, puts her in a situation where she's just like not, because I've had that happen before, you know, and it's a very real thing, especially people who aren't used to it. You know, and, you know, especially, you know, if you're talking about, you know, white people not really used to being looked at like that, you know, that's not really been a part of, you know, white people aren't used to anything like that happening. And I don't want to say all because, you know, there's, you know, it's not even about that. But at the same time, there's things, like you said, there's things that can happen while you're, you know, out and about in the world that you're going to have to deal with that if you're not prepared for, if you're not, you know, conscious of, that can hurt the relationship, can hurt, you know, how you view yourself, how you view the world, because people can be cruel, you know.
Right.
And a lot of times as a man, that's what you're thinking about a lot, because you're very aware of the fact that people can be cruel. You're very aware of the fact that people can say stuff and something could happen while you're in public, and, you know, there's a lot of things you would have to think about in that moment because, you know, you're limited in what you're able to do, and you have to be smart about it. So do you think, though, that people are going to would struggle more in terms of going towards somebody that they're interested in of a different race, more from the family, personal friendship aspect, or more from just like out in the world? Does that make sense?
No, that's a great question, because essentially what you're saying is it more what people think about you or more what people you care about think about you.
Right.
And
like, where's that, you know?
Where is that line? And obviously it's going to be both at some moment in time.
Right.
But that's a great question. I think it depends on what you're trying to do with the relationship. I think if that's someone who you truly think you can, you know, have a relationship with and be with for a while, then most definitely it's family. I think it's just like with anything, the instant gratification or the instant negative feedback is going to be with other people. But just like, you know, the sustaining factor, it's going to be the family. And whether the family is okay with that, can sustain that, is okay with that. And every family's different. Every family has their own personal biases, regardless of who it's with. So I almost want to flip that into, like, is it instant gratification or instant whatever the opposite of gratification is? Or is it just after a so long period of time, can you sustain that stigma? And will the family be able to overcome that? Because that's not something you can make the family overcome. It's almost like the family itself, depending on how you're brought up, depending on how you were raised, they're the ones that are going to have to overcome that. And I think that's, you know, that's a big deal. Whether the family, if that's something that you're trying to pursue long term, or whether it's just a short term thing and you're just trying to have fun, you know, I think those are two completely separate things. But ultimately, I would say it's got to be the family. Because I think if the family is okay with it, it's a lot easier to deal with the outside pressure than if the family's not okay with it. And I would say, at least from my experiences, getting the family to be okay with that, and not just okay with that, but acting normal. So they may be okay with it, but that doesn't mean they act normal with it. And I think that's where you gotta
if you were to bring someone of the same race over and how they would act, I think if you can get them to do that, then I think that it's going to be successful. And I've seen relationships where the family was never okay with it, and that put a lot of pressure on it. I've been in situations where the family was never okay with it, her family, my family, whoever, and it put a lot of pressure on us just because that was people we cared about, and they could just not understand that we liked each other and how we saw each other. They just couldn't do it. And, you know, I think it brings up an interesting dynamic, whereas do people actually change when it comes to race, or is how you're born, how you're raised, how you're taught, does that ever go away? Because if you can be with someone who is of the opposite race, and your family and your friends were raised a certain way or be okay with it and can change to accept that, then I think you can have a successful relationship. But more times than not, I think it all depends on how you were born and how you were raised.
And you're right, because I think this would be a lot harder for younger people, and most issues are, obviously.
Absolutely.
But when you start to get older, you start realizing life isn't like, it's real. There's real things that you have to deal with. There's real issues you have to confront. And I don't know so much about those things that you're like, however you were raised, whatever your experience was, and with your family, within your community, with your friends, that's naturally going to have a huge impact on you and how you are and how you view the world. But at the same time, what I've also learned about life is that pain is a pretty good changer of people as well.
Absolutely.
And, as you get older and life starts to get tough, in a different way than it is when you're younger, you start realizing that if I could find anything in life that really is a fit for me, that really does bring me some happiness and some peace and some joy, that you don't just let those things go by easily.
Absolutely not.
And so if there's anything that's going to change, quote unquote, it's going to be life itself. And there's going to come a point as you get older that you're going to really want somebody you can rely on, and somebody that loves you, and vice versa. And you're going to want that however it comes. It's not so much, intentionally going out and looking for someone of a different race or not or anything like that. It's just being open, because, everyone knows what it's like to be connected with somebody that's not right for you. And that's a lot of times worse than being alone, And so I do think that if there's going to be change, it's just the fact that as life goes on, as people get older and enough pain has, been brought into their lives after you've struggled enough with certain things, especially when it comes to romantic relationships, if you can find anybody, that you can fit with, that is a compliment to you and wants to be with you and loves you and vice versa, at the end of the day, overtake any kind of biases or prejudices that you might have. Do I think that's, I'm not at all going to say that that's a guaranteed thing. But I do think it's one thing that will have, can have an impact on how you go about things. Because I'm actually going to argue for the side of maybe the outside being kind of more of a pressure-filled situation than your family in this day and age, only because of social media.
Okay.
And I say that because I don't think it's really understood how important that is to people. You know, and it's the obvious. There's billions of people on all those sites combined, but I don't underestimate the power of image, and I don't underestimate the power of how important it is for you to not only have certain things, but for it to look a certain way as well. And the one thing our generation does not do well with is rejection. And anything that might cause us rejection or criticism, you know, we stay away from. You know, people don't do stuff and post stuff and say stuff and go places that they're not supposed to do, have, and go. You know, it's rare. Right. But at the same time, it's like that because we see how people are treated who do kind of go off the beaten path and have an opinion that might not be so popular, or, you know, have something or go somewhere or do certain things that aren't popular. And we see how they're treated, and we see how they're lambasted. And so society really hasn't made it easy to go outside the norm, because now we do have all of these avenues to criticize people in ways that's never been seen before. You know, we've had to create new words for the kind of things that people deal with now. You know,
Urban Dictionary.
You know, right, exactly. You know, I mean, people have found ways to criticize that, you know, like I said, we literally had to create words for it. So it's, you know, to me, I would say that's a huge issue because, like I said, so much of our lives are online. And, you know, if the thing that's not also, along with family, at the forefront of people's minds when it comes to how they choose relationships. Like I said, I don't think people are waking up every day saying, you know, I like that guy, but he's, you know, I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a forefront conscious thing, but it's there, and it's something that we just don't really like to talk about too much because, you know, no one wants that shame aspect, but you know, I got to believe that at the end of the day, you're going to want to find the person or people who really fit you and really are good for you, not only in romantic relationships, but in friendships as well, because, I mean, life is tough, and it's hard to find good people. You know, it's hard to find people you can trust. It's hard to find people you can depend on. It's hard to find romantic relationships that are fulfilling and, you know, and that do it for you and that are positive. And I believe that if that, you got to want it bad enough to be open and having to deal with whatever you're going to have to deal with in order to have that. So
would you say, I don't mean to cut you off, but would you say that, what would you say when, so if people are, or let's say like, we'll take me and you, for example. You know, you're black, I'm white. We have an interracial friendship. Do you think those people who have interracial friendships are going to be more willing to step outside of what is normal to their race to do that, versus someone who only has all black friends, only has white friends, only is all whatever their race is, they only have those friends? Are they going to be more dissuaded from stepping outside of that?
I definitely think they could have an impact on it. I mean, that would make sense to me. I think it might be a little bit easier for somebody who's used to having interracial friendships, you know, or even family members to be able to kind of go there relationally than someone who hasn't, most definitely. Or nothing else, it would make sense that it would be like that, you know.
Right.
But,
for sure.
How much weight would that have, or how much influence would that have? I'm not sure, because I think if you just have good people around you, period, you know, they're going to promote goodness in your life no matter how it comes. But at the same time, I definitely think that to be naive about where we're at even now, I think is a mistake.
Right.
Because, you know, and it has to be talked about. And it has to be important. Like I said, it has to be important enough to you for you to, at least nothing else, have that open mind. Because most people keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, trying to just have that work out for them. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, talk to anybody that's, you know, who's feel like they've met the one or who's married, you know, to somebody, and they'll tell you, like, look, this is not the person I was expecting. You know, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a different race, but most people who found that person say that I never would have picked this person if I never naturally would have picked this person. They weren't necessarily my quote-unquote type. I never would have, you know, it just didn't seem like it was a fit. But once I actually got a chance to get to know them, or, you know, the situation presented itself that allowed me to do that, you know, I found out that he's great or she's great, and, you know, we ended up, like I said, getting married. Or I feel like this person's the one for me. And so, to me, I think that's what is important just in general, is for people to be able to say, you know what, let me be open. Let me stop just assuming I know what I want. Let me stop assuming that only this type of person would be able to satisfy me, especially when that type of person has never been able to satisfy you or be able to fit you. But my question to you is, or did you want to comment on that before I ask you?
Yeah, no, I want to, and that's almost why I want to argue against what you said about the outside pressure, because I believe most people are going to listen to their people that they trust, close advisors, friends, family, essentially, and most friends or family, I have to believe, if they're good people, are not going to say not to someone or not to talk to someone based on how someone looks. And there is going to be some sort of stigma that's in that, but I just think it's a lot easier to deal with the outside pressure of it and the online aspect of it if the people around you are okay with that. And that's why I would say that that family and friends are probably a little bit more impacting. Now, initially, obviously, it's all about the outside, because initially you don't really know each other. But, you know, when it comes to actually getting to know someone, I think the friends and family are so important, and how and where they come from and how they're raised, I think determines a lot about how your relationship ends up.
Very true. No, it's true.
But what was the question you asked?
Like I said, we have, actually, before I ask you, we have about 10 minutes, so I'll probably ask this question, and then we'll give our last thoughts, and then we'll end it. But before I ask, I do want to tell our listeners, like, if you guys have any questions or comments about this, like, please let us know. Because, you know, we want to know what you think about this kind of thing. Because I know most people, I don't know how much people think about this thing, but I'm sure it's on people's minds. So, yeah, let us know.
Yeah, no, and absolutely to all the listeners, no matter where you're from, you've dealt with some sort of situation or issue when it comes to this, and so everyone can take something from this. And anything you guys want to know or any comments, most definitely hit us up, let us know, and then we'll definitely respond to that.
So my question to you is, what advice would you give somebody who's thinking about going down that route and does have some of the questions or concerns we kind of talked about tonight, and, you know, is kind of, you know, interested in somebody currently, or, you know, has been in the past, or, you know, feels like they might be in the future? What advice would you give them about moving forward in this area?
The biggest thing I would tell them is you have to talk about it with that person. Don't think it's not going to be an issue. Don't think it's not going to come up, because it will. Any sort of relationship I've had with someone who was not of the same race as me, it always came up at some moment in time, and usually at the wrong time. So definitely talk about it. You want to try to get ahead of it and talk about it and say, well, what are some issues? What are some things you could see forthcoming? How does your family react? How to, and talk about the family aspect. Talk about the friends aspect. Talk about just when you guys go out and you get put in a situation where it's uncomfortable for one or the other based on how other people are acting or reacting to you. Don't think that it's, typical guy, and that's kind of how I was, like, I'll deal with it when it comes. I was very unprepared to deal with it, and I handled it very badly. Don't do that. You want to make sure that you both understand that, yes, you do like each other, you do care for each other, but there is going to be this issue that's going to arise at some point, and how you guys are going to react and what makes you uncomfortable and what not makes you uncomfortable. If you're able to do that, I think you can get through the majority of it. And that's the thing that I wish someone would have told me going into it, was just to talk about it before anything happened. So that way we're prepared. And it's just like any good relationship. If you're prepared, you're able to deal with any sort of negativity in a much better way than if you just kind of react that moment in time. Because a lot of times you may react how I reacted, and it was very, I guess, primal at that moment in time because I got mad. And then, that situation did not end out very well. So just make sure that you're able to talk about it, I would say, would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, for me, it would be, if you're thinking about it, or like I said, this issue has come up in your life in some way, or if it's going to, just because you have concerns or some fears about it doesn't mean like you're a racist. First and foremost, like, I don't want people to think that, if this is something they might think about from time to time, that's the case. Like, you don't have to feel bad about it, because, like it or not, our society does put out those subliminal messages about certain races, and it's been there since the day you were born, and it's there every day in some way, shape, or form.
No, absolutely.
And I've never seen anybody have anything great or anything worth having. They didn't have to sacrifice or have to carry something with that thing that was undesirable. But I think if you're really serious about finding a relationship that, is really fulfilling and it's really good and it's what you've been really wanting and hoping for, if nothing else, you just have to have an open mind that it might not come in the form you're expecting it to come. And whether that be some other issue, but, specifically for this issue tonight of race, be open to what is going to be good for you. Don't let anybody change, or if nothing else affect what you know to be right for you. And if it's somebody that, may be a struggle to bring home, or even around your friends, or even on the internet, because I definitely believe that all of those are issues. All of those could be deterrents from stepping out. That don't let that stuff stop you. Just take it one day at a time. And like Mike said, it's, you got to be prepared, and you have to communicate, because the thing you're going to go into this and not be able to talk about it because you just think, things are just different now is not wise. So just be prepared to have those conversations and have them early. So it's out on the table, so you know where each other is coming from, and you can do it in a way so you don't have to wait. You can find somebody to love you, hey, more power to you. But I do want to thank you guys for listening tonight. Mike, or not Mike, you're dealing with me. Chase, Jonah, and Dan will be on Thursday. Shout out to those guys. They got a great show, and they make me laugh. They're gonna make you, definitely. So, big love, big shout out to those dudes. We will be back next week, same time. Most likely, might be 9, but just check back and let you guys know. Once again, you guys can get in touch with us, through this side, through Blog Talk, and email us, or you can hit up our Twitter page at Many Other Minds, or Mike doesn't have a Twitter, but my personal is ICUNVME66, and you guys can get at us on one of those. But like I said, I want to thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you got something tonight, and hopefully this will help you moving forward. Mike, any last words?
No, I was going to say, if you find someone, regardless of the situation, just make sure you pursue it. Don't let anything persuade you. If that's someone you really like and that's someone you really want to go after, then just go after it. But just be smart about it and know what sort of issues or problems they're going to bring. And good luck to everybody.
Yeah, most definitely. Our Sunday night show, Unspoken Words, is finally up and running under that new title. So that's what our relationship hour will be called now. So you guys can find us on Sunday nights at 8 with the girls. Brittany and Jackie are great. So they can drop that knowledge for you guys as well. But like I said, I want to thank you guys for listening tonight. Let us know what you think, and we appreciate you, and have a good night.
Hey.